I would like to call to order the Finance and Audit Committee meeting for May 21st, 2018. If we could all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just a couple of, a little bit of housekeeping. Vice Chair McLean and Mr. Mechanic and Mr. Knight send their regrets. They could not be here today, but I believe we do have a quorum with Mr. White, so we are good to go to the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Those opposed, like sign. Okay. All right. The motion is approved. Next on the agenda, we have public comment on agenda items. 3 minutes per speaker. Is anyone signed up to speak? No? Okay. Would anyone from the public in the audience like to speak on any of the agenda items? Okay. Seeing none. First, we have a presentation by Ms. Cindy Zambella.
Mr. Chair, I'll be giving the presentation.
Okay. First, we have a presentation by our interim CEO, Mr. Jeff Seward.
You have a clicker. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I am so impressed. Thank you.
Wow.
All right. So, good morning. I am going to provide an overview as we prepare for the fiscal year 19 budget. The focus of this presentation is going to be on our operating, although I do want to make a couple of comments about our long-term capital program and capital funding requirements at the end of the presentation. So this is a slide that you've become familiar with over the last couple of years that I show at the beginning of our budget discussions. And it really is just to show the various drivers and pressures that we have on developing our budget. And typically in presentations past, you've seen specific details outlined on each of these core pressures. But I just wanted to walk the circle real quick and just talk about what some of those pressures are for 19. The top one, cash flow and fund balance, that will continue to be a pressure. I don't see that being an eased pressure for a number of years. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly at the board level, of our lack of attacking and being aggressive on federal and state dollars. I'd like to remind the committee that we can be as aggressive as we want to be. If we don't have a local match of at least 20% on these projects, it is a moot point to move forward on it being aggressive. So we need to build that fund balance over the next couple of years to a point where we can have a match, or ask a partner or stakeholder in the community, such as the county or one of our municipalities, for help with a match, and it will be much less than it would be if we didn't have a full fund balance for a match. Our cash flow this summer is been much more positive than prior summers. We have, I truly believe the organization and staff has done a fantastic job of pulling back our spending. Our changes with Mission Max last year, although not as robust the savings as we had anticipated, are helping us with our cash flow for this year. Bargaining agreements. We are approaching negotiations, initiation of negotiations with both of our units going into the summer. Obviously, that is an unknown as we move into the next fiscal year. I'll talk a little bit about how we will prepare for that financially. And we will be bringing an update to the board probably in the next 60 days of a timeline for those negotiations. Decrease in ridership. Again, we've talked to the board as a whole about the reasons why ridership is declining nationally. During the APTA conference here in Tampa that we hosted, we had the opportunity to talk to a lot of agencies across the country that are all still seeing in some cases, double-digit declines in ridership. However, on the June 4th board meeting, I'm going to give a presentation on our Mission Max update. And we're starting to see our month-to-month start to plateau a little bit. The loss of ridership that we had seen year over year is not as drastic. So We'll be talking a little bit about that, but it is an issue for us as we move forward. Decline in ridership, even though the service that's out there now it is strong, we still have the decline in ridership, which affects our fare revenues, which in turn affects our revenues, overall revenues, and in turn affects our ability to spend. So it's something that we'll be looking at with a ridership campaign later this year as well. Increases in cost of doing business. I can say that over the last year, with Ms. Lee coming on board, we have gotten a lot of those expenses, internal expenses, under control as far as the human resource component of the organization. From our healthcare, of being able to properly budget what we need, to controlling costs of claims, burning down some of our risk and our liability cases that are out there, and finding resolution with those and getting those off the books is something that is helping us in a huge way of cost avoidance and cost savings. Although we cut in Mission Max, at the last board meeting, we talked about putting back in Route 57 or Route 48 for Temple Terrace. We're putting in 275, and we have the Uptowner. That's adding $4 million of additional service to the 18 budget. Now, typically what we do as we prepare for the next budget is we talk about adding the next year's component of the TDP into the budget. We just are not going to be able to do that this year. The $4 million is and you'll see why that $4 million is so important as I start to go through the presentation more. It's service that is necessary and needed. This is something that we feel very strongly about with the discussions with Temple Terrace and Hyperlink fading away at the end of July. So that's necessary. So this isn't a statement of, oh my gosh, we're adding $4 million. It's, hey, we're adding $4 million because we need to add $4 million worth of service because we have justification for it. It just happens to be a pressure that we have to deal with as we start to work on balancing the budget. So this is a slide you've seen a couple of times, particularly at the board level. The point of focus for our FY19 budget. Focus on the charter organization needs. And I would say that adding the 48 back in absolutely does that. We heard our constituents, we heard one of our charter municipalities discuss adding that service back in. We talked, we added. So again, it's focusing on the charter organizations. We have a lot of talks going on right now with the city of Tampa concerning the streetcar and the downtowner. So a focus going into next year is addressing those needs as well. Engaging the business community, economic engines, and solutions. Again, at the last board meeting, you saw a model for the Uptowner that is perfect to be replicated elsewhere in our community. And I believe very strongly that we have strong staff that can now go out and forge those relationships with organizations so the public component of the necessary funding is lower than what the private sector is putting in or other stakeholders. I think that's very important going into not just next year, but the next couple of years. Aggressively seek federal funding. We'll aggressively seek it, but we also need to aggressively build that match. Continued fixed route expansion paradigm. Again, I think we're doing that with the 19 budget. We're adding 275 LX. We're adding the 48. We're doing away with the N-Towner because of poor performance and the negotiations with the city of Tampa. So I think we are compartmentalizing that paradigm of always adding buses. Solutions need to be more organic and nimble. We have a great opportunity to look at different types of solutions. We have RFI out on the street for TNC's rideshare solutions. We are putting out an RFI for circulator solutions. We have our AV our solicitation that's out on the street right now. So we have the opportunity to really develop those types of service models that are organic and nimble, and we can collapse quickly and using my favorite capital P word, which is pilot. Doing a lot of those where we can, hey, it's 6 months, it doesn't work, we end it, we move on. We need to be able to do that without locking our taxpayers into long-term service that we're contractually obligated, but it's not providing any benefit. That paradigm needs to be broken. and pulling riders into the core grid. So again, all of these intertwine with one another. From engaging the business community to looking at organic solutions, pulling people into the grid that we remodeled in Mission Max. So an overview of our operating revenues. And again, as we always do in May, I'm going to end this with a deficit. And we've done that for the past 5 years. By law, we have to provide a balanced budget. By good stewardship, you should provide a balanced budget. We will have a balanced budget by the time we come back at the June committee, July board meeting to be able to show you. So, where we are with operating revenues, and I won't go down every revenue line, we're looking at an additional $4 million of revenue for next year. And that comes primarily from an 8.4% increase in ad valorem, or property tax, which, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Our revenues, we have a whole new revenue line for next year, and that's smart cards. We have not had that ever. It is new with our going live with Flamingo on Labor Day-ish, Labor-ish day. Later this summer, we will be going live, but it is an additional revenue source. And not additional, it's just a reclassification of a current revenue source. But we have smart cards. CNG rebates aren't alive and well anymore. We will not be seeing those next year. We continue to see the ridership loss, which is contributing to our fare reduction. We are in negotiations or working on putting ATMs at some of our transfer centers. We're looking at allowing cell tower placement on some of our properties. We've been looking at that for quite some time. It will be additional revenues. It won't be millions of dollars of additional revenues, but it will be additional revenues like we have with Megabus and Red Coach and the leasing of our hidden River Park and Ride. But it is trying to diversify some small revenues, and every dollar matters. So we don't have an exact amount for that next year, so instead of being like I typically am, a little bit aggressive in saying we're going to have this much, we're just going to leave it at zero, and anything new that comes in, we'll report back to the board and be happy. The 8.4% estimated growth in ad valorem. So that's $3 million-ish over in additional revenue. Something that we have to keep in mind, and we go back to that pressure slide, is that if in November the homestead passes, we're looking at about a $1.8 million hit to our ad valorem in fiscal year 20. So, as you'll see, we're kind of thinking ahead a little bit of trying to bank some of that money. So in 20, it could be almost a seamless year to year. We won't feel that bump. However, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25, we're going to feel that bump. Our partners are going to feel the bump even more. The county and the municipalities are going to be hit pretty hard by that exemption if it passes in November. We are planning on it passing and planning purposely in that manner. We do have an increase in FDOT funding. We're happy with our FDOT partners. We're getting additional funding for the 275 LX, $270K for the Uptowner, $100K for Route 48, and some of that is money that's being shifted around. We had talked about that a couple of board meetings ago, where FDOT's allowing us the movement of grant funding to accommodate these new routes instead of making us continue funding routes that are not successful. Shifting of FDOT hyperlink funding to Route 48. The continuance of the $2.3 million in county funding. That is not in revenue. That is not part of the revenue. The service, however, is an expenditure. So when I get to that delta, we'll talk a little bit about how important that $2.3 million becomes to be included in next year's county budget and in turn in our budget. The city of Tampa contribution for the in-towner, it's a loss to our revenue, but again, they paid for that in-towner. But that if you're looking at apples to apples from year to year, that money is no longer going to be there. Also on the streetcar side, we have not verified. I had a conversation with the THS board last Wednesday that our COO and I will be going out to the CRAs to talk to them about continuing the funding for the streetcar for free Saturday service, and maybe even a little bit extra above that to do other things. There's a question of whether or not, and that does reside in our budget. So those are some nuances. If you're looking line to line, that will change for next year. So on our operating revenue side, right now we're looking around $74.5 million as opposed to $70.5 million in revenue for fiscal year 18. Now on our expense side, so first line. Last year, the board approved a set number of FTEs. For the FY19 budget, we are looking at an FTE count, full-time equivalent count, of 51 above what was approved in the 18 budget. Can you flip real quick, please? Next slide. Please. Thanks. So, why 51? Well, one, the amount of FTEs that we anticipated dropping in Mission Max didn't get dropped. We retained them. Those FTEs didn't fade away, even though they weren't in our count. They stayed. That's part of that 51. We're looking at 16 operators. Those were the number from the county funded service from from this spring, from October on, when we implemented that county service without the county funding. We kept those FTEs that should have actually been moved off the books during Mission Max. There was a decision to keep them. So there were 16. We need 13 operators for the 275LX. And again, we talked about that $4 million of service for next year. A lot of it are these numbers you're looking at right now. 13 operators for the 275LX, 7 operators for Route 48, 8 operators for our paratransit, 6 operators for streetcar morning service, once we get that approved with the City of Tampa, 2 fixed route supervisors, a streetcar supervisor, 1 bus mechanic, and 1 bilingual travel trainer for paratransit. Now you may notice what is not on here. There are no non-bargaining positions on this list. These are all bargaining, direct operational support FTEs. Will this number change in the course of the next few weeks before we bring back a revised proposed budget for you? They may. I don't want them to go up. I want them to go down if possible, but this is just a draft of what we're looking at right now to show you what it takes to run the service that we're putting back into place and adding for next year. And the fact that we really need to true up that FTE count because it's not accurate of what we said we were going to have versus what we do have. So we want to true that up in the 19 budget to truly show the accurate number of FTEs. Thank you. Increased healthcare claims net of employee contribution. Right now our split is 83.5 versus 16.5. So that means 83.5% of the claims are paid by HART, 16.5% are paid by the employee. We have not had a discussion. We've had a couple discussions at the staff level of what it would look like to alter that mix. I feel pretty strongly that pushing the burden back onto the employees, it should not be our first option.
I agree.
All right. We need to look at ways to solve the deficit without putting the burden on our employees to pay more for the healthcare component of it. I'm not saying it's off the table totally, but typically we've had discussions, particularly at the board level, where we want to go right to that. And I would ask some patience as we move through this, that we want to find other solutions to that deficit other than going right to that level. Increase in diesel gallons. Again, we're adding 275LX and we're adding the 48. Even though we have CNG buses, we still have a large diesel fleet, so we will increase our diesel consumption. And if you've also noticed, and you probably noticed if you filled up your tank like I did this morning, fuel prices are even with our fantastic fuel contract, we're still going to get taken to the cleaners on fuel for next year. There's just no way around it. Price per gallon is going to be much more than it is or what we budgeted in 18. Bus parts for the added service, Flamingo implementation, we move forward. It costs money to move into the new smart card program. We have a contractual obligation. We have warranties that have to be paid. But this was all anticipated. These are not expenses that were like, oh my gosh, we were not prepared for this. We were absolutely prepared for this. We knew it when we came forward a couple of years ago and talked about it. We absolutely said that these were expenses that were going to be upcoming, and it was incumbent upon us to figure out a way to pay for them. ADP improvements, we talked about moving a lot of our internal processes on the human resource side and payroll side to an automated service, including a training component. And we were moving forward with that. A general liability claims increase of $300,000. Which is really aligning ourselves to what we're looking at, what we're spending this year. So this is much more trued up amount. And we have a $1.2 million contingency reserve. And this is exactly what it says. It's a contingency. And what it really is, and staff may actually smile at this, it is the help Jeff balance the 19 budget reserve. So it's there to help with some of this wiggle room that we may need. But we also may need it because, again, one of those pressures that we're facing is the unknown on the collective bargaining agreement. So we don't know what that impact would be. And I'm not even anticipating what that is right now. We don't even want to even, on a budgetary level, make a guess that we're going to put into the system right now. So for operating expenses, we're looking at $78.9 million, which is a difference from this year of our $70.5 million. So our tentative budget deficit, right now we have a $4.3 million deficit. Now, back to the county funding. Again, it's included in the expenses, the service that we added last year, or for FY18, with the county funding of $2.3 million. The service expenditure is here. The revenue from the county is not. And the reason that it's not is that it's an unknown. And for us to put it in here and march through the summer with a balanced budget and then it not happening puts us at a deficit at adoption.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And the way that I hear that, you describing it as an unknown, I think the outside observer could say, well, Jeff, there are other unknowns, grants and whatnot, but those aren't necessarily unknowns. So the way that I look at it is we have recurring grants that we get every year, and we get this funding, and it's predictable. This is not necessarily predictable. This is a first for us, and it's not a recurring thing. So I just wanted to kind of just comment that I think the way you're characterizing it is accurate.
And if I could, I don't want to, and what I don't want to do is to make it sound onerous on the county's behalf. It's the same process that we follow. I'm presenting to you now the proposed budget of what our expected expenditures and our expected revenues are. The county is going through the same process. So I understand that we won't know until adoption whether or not the funding has been approved by the county. That's something that we did this year and walked through, although we went ahead and put the service into play without the funding being in place. It is an unknown, but it's an unknown that we're working closely with the county administration on having it in the budget discussions, brought on by a couple of our board members. But the reality, as an example, if you put the slide back up, on the $4.3 million, if the $2.3 million of county revenue appears, that deficit goes to 2. And it's pretty simple math. So I have a $2 million deficit. We have a $1.25 million contingency. Here we're down to $1 million. There's a few other ways that. So this is, I would argue, of the 6.5 years that I've been here, This is the happiest deficit I have ever seen. This is
Interesting term, a happy deficit.
Happy deficit, yes.
Okay.
It's manageable. It provides service. It provides a strong foundation for our employees. It provides an organization that's moving forward with innovative service and solutions. That's a deficit that can be dealt with. However, it's a $4.3 million deficit that I am going to work with staff and an organization on reducing in anticipation of not having the county funding. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, that means that if at our final public hearing and the county's final public hearing, that $2.3 million is not a revenue source for fiscal year 19, we are going to look at a service change for December of rolling all that county service of that $2.3 million back out of our budget as an expenditure. So the service has been on the street or will have been on the street for a year. One of the only ways to really balance it is to pull those services back out. Now, as we move through the budget year, we may find ways of altering some of that service or making it a little less cost prohibitive. But the plan as it stands right now is the best way to drop a deficit number that has an expense and no matching revenue is to drop the expense or bring in the revenue. For planning purposes and for transparency, we are going to budget towards we won't have it and we're going to have to back that service back out. So it's just a fact of this budget development that we're going to be working on. That I want to make it very clear that it's not a given that if we don't receive that funding, we can continue that service. That service was predicated on that funding, and that's part of our deficit right now. So I am working with Mr. Merrill. We're looking at refining some of the funding that was actually provided in 18. Some of that was actually not part of the 2.3, but the county also budgeted $350,000 of capital money for HART, which we weren't really aware of until maybe a month ago. So what's great about capital funding is it carries over. It's not like operating revenues that at the end of the fiscal year the slate goes clean. This is money that will continue until spent. So right now it was specifically set aside for capital infrastructure for Hyperlink. Well, Hyperlink is going away in July, so what I've promised county administration is that I would have a proposal for that $350,000 of capital, which staff is preparing now a list of important one-time capital investments that money could be used for. So that money is not part of the 2.3. We appreciate it. That's great. I didn't know that we had even asked for that money, and it's available. Working on a way to really make good use of it and leverage it.
Commissioner White? So
I'll just say from the county's perspective, unfortunately, I don't think the $2.3 million is a given. I think it is very much up in the air and something that, will have to be fought for. As I understand our budget, we're going through the preliminary budget process over there. I don't think it's just a formality that needs to be rubber stamped at this point. I think it's coming in as a commissioner item, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and those are, those are items that are very much, in play or on the block as we're looking to balance our budget over there. So, I'll watch it intently as we go through our budget process over there. But I just thought I'd let our audience here know and the members of this committee know that, unfortunately, like you mentioned with the grants, it's not just a formality at this point.
Right. Thank you for that perspective.
And to that point, it's my gut is I've been on both sides of the fence, on the county and obviously on the agency side, is 20. We're all looking. We're preparing the 19, but we're really looking at 20.
Terrified.
Because 20 is where we hit the wall, and we collectively as tax-funded organizations, property tax-funded organizations. So even, and I can totally understand that even if it was put in place for 19, we would be having the same discussion, and it would probably be more of a futile discussion as we approach 2020. So is it easier to unravel that now as we prepare for that wall? I would argue most likely, yes, it is easier now to pull that back and prepare for the next year. But again, as we continue these discussions, and I anticipate the June 4th discussion on this, we'll have the same discussion on the county funding. But between now and then, though, I have a meeting with the county administration, so I may have a little bit more information. But yes, it's really comes down to it's competing with other asks. So our budget schedule, July 16th board meeting. We should have a preliminary property valuation by Memorial Day, beginning of June. In July, we will set our not to exceed millage rate, something I didn't put on here, but it's that deficit and the revenues are based on staff recommending a setting of the tentative millage at our charter cap of 0.5 mils is what it has been the last few years. In August 6th, at the HART board meeting, we'll have a proposed 19 budget presented, and that'll be the full balanced budget for your evaluation. August 13th, we will go through it one more time with this committee to prepare for the public hearing. Something that I would, and I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the chair about this, but I think it would be beneficial, and this is something I've thought about the last couple of years, is sort of having a public hearing dry run with the committee itself, with the materials that we're going to present, the scripts and so on, to get feedback from the committee instead of just taking it from the staff perspective. So we would be doing that in August, and then September, TBD, the evening public hearings for the adoption of the operating and capital budgets. So on the capital side, and again, typically I don't bring the capital budget to you this early, but there are a couple of key points that you will be seeing when we finally do. As you know, the FTA has mandated all federally funded agencies to develop a transit asset management system and a plan to truly go through and assess all of your tangible assets in your organization, from facilities to vehicles to equipment, provide a useful life, and provide a state of good repair schedule of what it takes to keep them in a state of good repair. We have gone through that process. We've worked on that process. And what we are tentatively looking at, we're looking at about a $55 million state of good repair deficit for this organization. The equipment, vehicles, facilities. Now, that isn't like cliff jumping type of deficit, but it is something that we very much have to strategize on how we are going to address that moving in to the next 5 and 10 years. So, as a hypothetical, I was asked by a stakeholder a couple of weeks ago, if you were able to get an additional $5 to $7 million for service, what could you do? And my first reaction was, I would appreciate $5 to $7 million of one-time capital money to start working on these issues. We're going to get to a point that adding $5 million of service isn't going to achieve anything without being able to buy the buses, fix the infrastructure, and make sure that everything is in a state of good repair instead of just nickel and diming adding service out there. We really need to take a real hard look at investing as much as we can in our internal assets and infrastructure. So that $350,000, even though it's hard to balance on a $55 million state of good repair deficit, we can utilize that $350 and leverage it. And we can do some important work in the organization as far as our infrastructure is concerned. So during this process, you're not going to see an FY19 plan to address $55 million of state of good repair. we are going to start seeing a plan to start addressing those things and start going after tax dollars, grant funding to be able to help with those. We'll be looking for matches and building of the fund balance to help with that. So it may not be a sexy budget, but it's an effective budget. And again, it's putting the service that's needed, looking at innovative ways to put service out there, to pull into the grid, being organic, being nimble, provide for our employees, and most importantly, provide for the taxpayers. And that concludes my conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Harden.
Yeah, I had
recognized.
a couple questions. So on the streetcar free Saturdays, had there been consideration by staff of looking at, a potential, extended ongoing contribution from the CRAs to maybe build morning ridership, since the free Saturdays doesn't appear to have built ridership at all?
Yes, we are. As part of dissolving the in-towner, which we're doing public outreach now for that. With that funding, the plan is to add morning service, morning service that matters, something to be able to build that ridership, and to refocus, to reinvest the money in that specific service, and maybe even don't fall out of the chair, everything. Maybe even some rush hour service as well, or commuter service in the afternoon. We can get them to work, but coming back, we may not be able to do that. So, yes, on the streetcar side, we want to invest. We want to really work hard in showing that the streetcar can be a valuable commuter tool.
Yeah, so specifically, though, approaching the CRAs about using their funding, if they're willing to extend it to build morning ridership for benefit of the CRAs rather than hauling folks over to the Ybor Day Market. I mean, I guess that's what so I think the underlying reports that we received in the streetcar meeting showed that while the Saturday ridership went up, the overall ridership went down more than the free Saturday ridership, meaning that ridership actually dropped. So, has staff considered asking the CRAs to continue the funding that they're providing, but for the purpose of morning ridership?
Yes, the staff has. So what I want to do is when we go to talk to the CRAs is have a package of options, and to say if we were able to take the money that you provide now, we could do A, B, C, D with it. And one of the focuses would be coupling that money with the city funding, and we could really do some great morning service that's substantial with higher frequency. So the answer to your question is yes.
So then the budget indicates that there would be a loss of the in-towner funds. So is the city not committed to moving those funds into the streetcar?
No, yes. It's just a line item. If you were to look for in-towner funding, you would no longer see it.
Right.
Eventually, that $250 or $230 would end up being in the streetcar budget. So it's just a shuffling of the lines.
Okay, and then I have two more questions. Thanks for your patience. I'm slow. So on this, the paratransit portion of the budget's huge, and obviously the county has parallel services, and I know there's been mention about determining what efficiencies there are. I'm sure that nobody on the commission likes operating two infrastructures to accomplish one goal, but have you had any meaningful conversations with the county about efficiencies there? And the question can be rhetorical, but I'm putting it out there. So,
and we have, after I believe the April board meeting, we had made a commitment to sit down with Sunshine Line and talk through that, and we have had one joint conversation with the COO, myself, and the leadership of the county. We're looking at ways to collaborate. We are also in the process of our own paratransit audit. Solicitations out on the street. So my plan is most likely in the August timeframe, we're going to have a presentation from our staff and from Sunshine Line on the uniqueness of each of our services, and then those components of the services that are not so unique that we could look at some cooperative engagement. So we are having those conversations right now.
Okay, so we see learning about that in August.
Yes.
Okay.
And by then, I don't know the time frame on our audit.
Greg Bracken, Director of Ops Support. That RFP was out on Friday. We had our pre-bid meeting. We had 4 vendors show up for the RFP process, so that will be closing in the next 20 days, I believe. So we'll have a concurrency of who the bidder for that audit is going to be.
Okay.
So just one more question, and so the 55 million number of, deferred maintenance or, deferred, costs that we need to be state of the art, I guess, what's the largest 2 items in that 55 million? Does that include the new facility or?
No, it does not.
Okay.
It does not include the new
So that's
facility.
all, shorter term assets, buses and equipment.
It is.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you. Thank you for that report.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. Thank you. Good report. And I think, just a quick comment, I think it's evident to me, just the fiscal perspective that you bring, and it's definitely appreciated, that fiscal responsibility perspective and the conservative approach and a proactive approach, telling us about things that we're going to see, in the coming years today. So thank you. Next, item 2 is committee action items. And first we have item A. I think we have a presentation on that. Mr. Brian Allen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This resolution is to request the purchase of 10 40-foot CNG-powered heavy-duty buses to replace existing fleet. This purchase will be through the Lynx State Consortium contract, and the purchase is being made through the Federal Transit Administration's block grant. This purchase of these 10 buses will bring our CNG fleet up to 70 buses out of 160 for the active fleet.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, Mr. Seward, you're recognized.
Why aren't we ordering 11 buses?
We are holding back on the 11th bus so we can order paratransit vehicles, which I will be bringing to you next month.
How many?
Hopefully 7, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
So I have a question. Did we
Yes,
just,
Commissioner White, you're
did we
recognized.
just knock out 10% of that deferred maintenance issue, or did that already account for the purchase of these?
Sadly, no.
All right. Okay. Well, all right. Well, thank you, Mr. Allen. Do we have a motion, or is there any question or comment on this or discussion? If not, do we have a motion on agenda item A?
Motion to approve.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Okay. The motion carries. Item 2A. On to item 2B. We have a presentation from Cindy Zambella. Ms. Cindy Zambella. Good morning.
Good morning, Cindy Zambella. I'm the Budget Director and Grants. This morning you have a resolution before you that will authorize the Interim Chief Executive Officer to authorize the application for the Surface Transportation Block Grant. The Surface Transportation funding is granted through the Federal Highway Administration. It's transferred to HART through the Federal Transit Administration and provides the largest source of revenue for our bus replacement program. As you just heard in the previous item, we'll be using this grant to purchase 10 buses. Over the last 5 years, we've received approximately $19 million. We've replaced 35 40-foot buses and 4 small cutaway buses.
Okay. Great. Are there any questions? Thank you, Ms. Zambella. Are there any questions or comments?
Move the item.
All right. Commissioner White would like to move the item. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, second. Okay. All those in favor of funding our organization, please respond by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. All right. Agenda item 2B carries. All right. Next, we have agenda item 2C.
Good morning.
Good
Linda
morning.
Crescentini,
Good morning,
Interim
Ms. Crescentini.
Director of Enterprise Project Management. And we're here today to ask for the advancement of the design for the heavy maintenance facility. And before we get started, we're going to do a very brief presentation for you to introduce the design build team and where we've come from, why we're here today, and our next steps going forward. So with that, I would like to introduce Ms. Julianne Bandies from Bandies Construction. And just a very brief bio on the team that she brings with her today is Bandies Construction is a local contracting firm who's been in the area for 32 years, very successful firm. Some of their key projects that relate to what we're looking for today is they've successfully completed their third Audi dealership in Wesley Chapel. Prior to that, they completed an Audi Infinity combination in Sarasota, which was over 85,000 square feet, which is larger than what we're looking for, and also some government center for Plant City. With her team, she's also brought, they're responsible for the build part of the design build project. With her team, she's brought Wendell. They're a national architectural firm that has designed hundreds of transportation projects, transit, and specifically heavy maintenance buildings. So some of their key projects recently is for heavy maintenance is they've recently completed Fort Myers locally and Washington, D.C. Also, as part of the team is we have Mr. Lowell Clary from Clary Consulting, and he is helping us with looking at the financial impact of the project. He brings expertise from assistant in a prior life, being assistant secretary for the Florida Department of Transportation for finance and audit. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Ms. Julianne Bandies to give you a very brief description of what's in the
Thank you. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. Me and my team have been working for many months with your procurement and facilities teams. So we were successful in the RFP for the renovation of your heavy maintenance building many months ago. Since then, we have gone through many iterations of pre-design work, site analysis, and we have come up with the solution of kind of engineering a new facility for you. There is just a number of issues which I'm sure the committee is familiar with in terms of the old facility. If you haven't been through it, I invite you to walk through. And so over these past few months, we've analyzed this, and my purpose today is to kind of convey to you what we've done, our recommendations, and then to request approval for the design phase portion. The original renovation proposal divided the building into 31 different areas. Each area had multiple breakouts in terms of electrical, mechanical, plumbing, architectural improvements. And these improvements did not include upgrades to your site. They did not include upgrades to the entire structure. So when you improve more than 50% of a building, you have to bring all systems up to code, mechanical, electrical, also things like ADA compliance and hurricane hardening. And it also left off a few other items like workflow, building layout, security, lighting. I assume those items were not included because your procurement team just wanted to be judicious with costs, not kind of throwing it all in there. In addition to those issues, there were other items being addressed through separate RFPs that were not under my umbrella, such as hazmat remediation. There are some contaminants on your site, and then also a major re-roofing project to the HM building that was to take place shortly after my work was done. So if we see this slide here, I provided an overview of costs that we have projected in terms of our RFP and also other costs that the agency would incur. And by far, the biggest variable here you'll see is the site. Your site has been an issue that's been under discussion for many years. Most recently, in 2017, a study was done to examine ways to deal with the stormwater that has been collecting here and elsewhere throughout the site campus, throughout the HART campus. HART sits in kind of a basin. It's a receptacle for almost 36 acres of residential area. And so dealing with that has been a challenge. Previous to that, there had been a joint study between HART, City of Tampa, FDOT, to determine where the water was flowing. And so I'm coming to you here today. The only reason I can really kind of commit to engineering the site is because this previous work has been done. And so you'll see the screen there. The last report that was commissioned had 3 separate options for figuring out the site, kind of the Cadillac option, a step down that would have provided, kind of lesser relief, and then sort of a Band-Aid that would have been very minimal. And that's why the spread on that number is so large. we are asking for approval for site design as part of this design contract. The site is what I think is the most critical part, and then of course the HM building is in kind of disrepair, as I've spoken about previously. There's a good primer in the handout for today's meeting on the history of that building. So if we're authorized, the site design and building design will proceed at the same time. We project it will take between 8 and 9 months. And I'm going to show some of these flooding slides, which are pretty, there's more than this, but the problems are significant. And this is where we are proposing to locate it here on the site. So we've completed pre-design analysis. So this involved 2 days worth of meetings with pretty much every department in your agency to determine exactly what we needed. We did an examination of bus flow, and this is where we ended up putting the building. These are the layouts we're proposing. These will be refined during design. And here's a 3D rendering, which kind of show a very modern, functional building. Our new design also addresses things that are, kind of important. Bus flow, employee access, employee parking, refueling, things that were also outside the scope of the original RFP, but are very much worth addressing. And at the end of the design process, at the end of this contract, you will have a fully permitted set of design, vertical building drawings, as well as civil drawings with a guaranteed maximum price for construction. That's important because at that time we can kind of commit to funding in ways that my partner Lowell Clary will elaborate upon. Lowell is a transportation finance expert. He worked for FDOT for a number of years, and we'll work with your team to propose innovative financing solutions. If, for example, at the end of this design process, there is some reluctance to move forward with the actual construction project, I still think this proposal provides value in terms of improving the site and providing an option for the new building. These plans and the budget will last for some time, and so at the end, if there's additional questions from this committee or the larger board committee, we'd be happy to address those and kind of move forward in a prudent fashion. And at this point, I'd like to kind of move forward with any questions and answers, and maybe invite Lowell up here to discuss financing.
All right, Commissioner White, you're recognized.
So how would the cost of this proposal compare to just acquiring a new site and building a new structure on a new site? Because it seems like we have some significant issues.
You do.
Here.
You're located in a great spot. It would be hard to find the amount of land you would need to kind of build vertical. You also have existing infrastructure here, which has been developed and maintained. And so the cost of the building is significant, but I think overall it's the best option. I mean, you don't want to go around looking for an entirely new campus. It could be much farther away. There would be additional costs incurred.
To what magnitude, as a percentage, let's say?
Well, the vertical construction number really is going to stay the same no matter where you go. And so then the question is, well, what's the other costs? Where are the other costs attributed to? And the site costs are significant. I mean, you could go around and look for a new facility, but I still think investing here, given land prices in Hillsborough County and the central location of your 21st Avenue campus, it's pretty hard to beat. I mean, you are not in an enviable position in terms of where to, retain your stormwater and deal with it here, but it's one of those things that you'll have to deal with eventually, and I do think it's in the best interest of the agency.
Mr. Stewart? Mr. White.
Thank you. So how confident are we that the stormwater issue will be solved, completely mitigated? I mean, I guess in a 100-year storm event, we'd probably still stand to see some issues, but that's my greatest concern.
It's a big concern, and it's one that we've thought a lot about. We've actually had extensive meetings with my team and HART staff and the City of Tampa and FDOT all in the same room, trying to get together and understand kind of the regional nature of these flooding problems. These meetings have been going on for some time, and part of the request in this design contract is to continue those conversations and come up with a feasible design that meets everybody's needs. So I'm reluctant to say there's going to be some resolution between our agencies, but I do note that they are willing to play ball. The City of Tampa specifically has been very receptive, and perhaps you can even help us with those conversations. But it's a regional issue. Flooding's not just happening here on 21st Avenue on your campus. It's happening throughout the basin and throughout the it's called the 43rd Street Outfall Basin, throughout that entire geographical area down through I-4. You guys are really right in the center of it.
Have you talked to, and I can't speak for the two municipalities that are part of this agency, but have you spoken with county administration to see if, maybe we have, land that would otherwise be on the surplus list that they'd be willing to work with HART on?
No, we haven't. And one of the primary reasons why we feel very strongly about maintaining the current site is the amount of federal investment that we have at that site. We have a multi-million-dollar compressed natural gas facility that the federal government paid for and is intact. We have our diesel fueling stations along with the tanks and fueling apparatus. And by the building of this facility up, one, at a higher elevation than our current facility, it allows all of those current assets to stay intact without having to modify, move, or rebuild them at another site. So we feel pretty confident that, one, we aggressively address the stormwater issue by getting the funding to be able to go and actually do a study on what's necessary. Working with SwiftMud and the basin issues, I would argue that we have seen a decrease in overall flooding on that site over the last couple of years. That picture is sort of dated. But we are confident that the investment in the vertical construction at the higher elevation on that site, along with the stormwater improvements that can happen over time, and the eventual collapse, bad word in construction, demolishing of that old facility, it strengthens the federal investment on that site. I think it would be it's positive. It would be cost prohibitive to move all of the fueling structure, including the CNG and our admin facility, which was just renovated 5 years ago, to another location. So I'm confident that this investment at the current site is the most successful and cost efficient.
That makes sense. Good question, though.
I have one final question,
Sure, Mr.
if I may.
Commissioner White.
So this site, with respect to its FEMA flood zone classification, what zone is that site in?
I don't know the zone, but I do know that SwiftMud had permitted the site back in 1983 was the first permit that was issued, and there's been several permits issued since then, like you said, for the admin building and then also for a fuel station. But the overall game plan for the site originated back in the 80s. And this would improve, this is sort of a comprehensive upgrade to the entire site. It's overdue.
I guess I do have one final question, if I still have the floor. So, how confident are you with respect to flood events? I mean, do you think we'll still have flooding there? How often do you think it'll occur? How severe do you think it'll be?
I think we'll solve the problem. I think given the previous design work that's come before our team arrived, is the only reason that we can really kind of have confidence in this engineered report now. I mean, we'll move forward and it will take a while to figure it out. But the reports are sort of, there's a lot of information there and there's a lot to kind of analyze and move forward with. And there's a lot of different entities who are working on this with us. So we're talking about some really major improvements to the site. I have a lot of confidence that they'll work. You can't upgrade the building without upgrading the site either. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a tandem deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner White. Just a quick comment. If looking at the rendering of the front of the building, it looks like there are 3 floors. Is that just there are only 2 floors, correct?
There are only 2, yeah.
Okay. All right. Why does it look like there are 3 floors, I guess is my question.
Part of it's a bus maintenance facility, so the bus bays actually have a higher ceiling height.
Right.
It could appear as though it's taller.
Yeah, I saw the rendering in the back. I think for the board meeting, it might be good to have more, I guess some enhanced renderings or just some I anticipate there might be some questions on that, on the renderings, but then also to kind of give perspective on the fact that it's a maintenance building, you know, because the front of it almost looks like an admin building, just kind of first impressions.
We can get those.
And then I think it might be good just to make sure, because I think there's a trust factor here on by the way, you've done a great presentation, and I think, and I appreciate the nod to the previous work on the stormwater issues, because it sounds like you're reliant on that work, you know, and on that previous work that was done. I think it might be good to kind of drill into, you know, we have this presentation or this Bandy's work and their proposal, if you will, or what they're moving forward with. But it might be good to do almost like a revisit on the overall stormwater issues because of the $7 million jump there from 0 to 7. Is that do you? In terms of just a brief history or overview on that for the board, not necessarily today.
I can speak to the $7 million jump.
Sure.
It's because we were only funded for preliminary investigation and design. We were not funded for construction. So HART did not have funding to move ahead with the implementation of what was found out during the design process.
Okay.
So there was never construction funding. So we have 0 construction funding right now for stormwater. But as part of this project, stormwater improvements will be included.
I think it's also, you can also talk about the nature of the second report. The first report analyzed where the water was flowing and where it was collecting. The second report analyzed what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And so those 3 options that I mentioned earlier are kind of conceptual in nature. And my team did the best that we could in terms of takeoffs. But these ongoing conversations and just the different ways to deal with the water, it really makes it a moving target.
Okay. Yeah, and again, I think you've presented the numbers and everything quite well here. I think maybe for the board meeting, you know, maybe Linda, just a kind of a supplemental update on that. So thank you. Good job. Appreciate it.
Sure. Any other questions?
Anyone else?
Thank you.
So,
Okay.
quick,
Mr.
so
Hahn, you
on
recognize?
the supplemental information we're talking about, it would be helpful, and I think that to push this forward for the whole board to make a decision on is you know, the time is now to do that. But on both the overall cost projection project elements, a bit of a more breakdown of what you're projecting the costs are going to be after we agree to pay this large design fee, and then a little bit more of a breakdown of what this design fee actually includes with regards to kind of civil and architectural and site conceptual, and that would be helpful for me personally. If
I actually do have another slide or two to that effect.
Okay.
So this is kind of a proposed project timeline here, which I've kind of already gone through, and you can look at in more detail if you like. Here's some other cost data on similar buildings that you might want to look at. The best example we have now is a Pasco County project that my firm just won last week, actually, for a very similar building, also designed by Wendell, our architectural partners. So we have some confidence in the vertical building number, you know, even though the design is not complete.
No, I understand. I'm asking for like it to be unrolled a little further than that, so
Sure.
we can understand like building equipment, site work, site design, building design, FF&E, you know. So
Absolutely.
thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. With that, unless there are any other questions or comments, and do we have a motion to advance this item to the board for approval?
I move to advance this item to the board for approval.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Okay. The motion carries. Thank you all. Appreciate it. All right. Next is agenda item 2D. We have Ms. Brooke Basquith here, Director of HR and Compliance. Good morning.
Morning. Brooke Basquith, Director of HR. I'm here with this action item to authorize the Interim Chief Executive Officer to award a 1-year base with 2 1-year options contract for consulting and broker services for our health insurance and benefits programs to Arthur J. Gallagher Benefit Services. We completed the RFP process with procurement, started in February, went through that process and have a recommendation for you all. We finished that May 1st, and so I'm here today to present the contract for Arthur J. Gallagher and answer any questions you all may have.
Are there any questions? Okay, no? All right. Do we have a motion to approve this resolution?
Yeah, motion to advance this to the board.
Advance this to the board? All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, second. Okay, all those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, like sign. All right, the motion carries. Thank you, Brooke. Appreciate it. All right, next on the agenda, we have the interim chief executive officer's report.
I have no report, Mr. Chair.
Okay. With that, next is the chair's report, and I just have a couple of items. First, I'd like to say thank you to staff and everyone who contributed and to the APTA conference, the bus rodeo. I attended some of the event. Thank you for the invitation, and I just wanted to pass along that the comments that I received from people that I met at the conference, they were just so pleased with the welcome, the hosting. I got great feedback. So great job to everyone who participated in that and made it a success. And then on a side note, I think there were a lot of people from out of town. This is a national conference. People are in love with Tampa. I mean, I got some great feedback. People loved coming to a conference here, and that was really encouraging to hear. One other note on partnerships, and kind of tying in ridership and partnerships. And Jeff, I know that you've commented multiple times that ridership is plateauing, I guess, right now. And given the state of things nationally, like you said, that was discussed at the conference. Plateauing is, we'd like it to increase, but we're dealing with what we can, right? So I think as we move forward, these discussions and our actions and our are as much as addressing or dealing with the reality, today and moving forward. There's so much happening. I actually got my first ride my third ride in an autonomous or automated vehicle, I should say, and it was on the Selman Expressway. It got up to 50 miles an hour, and I just bring that up because things are changing very rapidly. There were folks there. It was just a great experience. But I think that I'm glad to see that our perspective is that we're adapting to the current environment and the coming environment, as opposed to trying to, maintain old ways for the sake of maintaining old ways and doing things the way we used to do them, because that's the way we used to do them. So thanks. That's a credit to you guys and Jeff for your leadership. One other thing, let's see, I think that was it. I definitely look forward to, I know there was some discussion, again, this ties in with the finance part, so I'm going to bring it up. It's important to our committee, as far as our leadership. And I couldn't make the last board meeting. I do apologize for that, but I do hope to make the next one. And I definitely plan to express my thoughts on Jeff's background and his role and the importance of that financial perspective in a CEO, like almost in the current time, in the current circumstances. A lot of times things are about a certain context or time, and I just want to, I plan to, kind of bring that to the table if as needed. So that's it. That's my report. Thank you all, and with that, I believe we're adjourned. Have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hart.
Have a great week, you guys.
I want you to know, I was at that